Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Whitney Waugh. I am the Director of Education Administration. I'm a clinical assistant professor of child and adolescent psychiatry at Hassenfeld Children's Hospital at NYU Langone in the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. I'm also a licensed clinical psychologist here in the Child Study Center. And today we're going to be talking about emotional boiling point, helping families cool down and reduce harmful conflict. What we're going to be going over today is probably nothing new for you. But what I hope it does is it packages some of these things in strategic ways that can help you access your best parenting in moments of conflict and increased emotional arousal, and help you coach your kids through these big emotions and conflict. So I want to start off with the point that emotions matter. How we feel impacts our attention and memory and learning. It impacts our decision-making ability, our relationship quality, our physical and our mental health, and also what behaviors we have access to in any given moment. And we might ask ourselves, why don't humans notice changes in their emotions? Why don't we talk about it? Well, culturally, emotions aren't something that for many of us are talked about. Some people have difficult times noticing little changes in their emotions and the associated psychological and physiological changes that come with it. And this might be because they never learned how. It might have just not been talked about in their family of origin. Some people might understand certain emotions better than others or feel comfortable expressing them. So maybe anger and love is comfortable, but other feelings aren't. You might have had negative experiences around sharing your emotions or expressing emotions. Or you might have been sent incorrect messages about emotions and their expression. Now, some people also avoid their emotions because they're aversive. They might trigger anxiety. They might not feel good. Or there might be these secondary emotions that pop up that are uncomfortable. Some people respond strongly and aren't given a way out from their first emotional reaction, and that might not be your true actual emotional feeling. So I think an example that a lot of people who have kids might resonate with is a toddler who you say, please put your shoes on, and they say no right away, but start walking over to get their shoes, right? We have to sometimes give people an out on their first reaction so that they can engage in a different behavior. And I call that throwing your kid a lifeline, throwing a person a lifeline. And then there are certain mental health diagnoses that might make it harder to notice changes in emotion. So people with attentional difficulties might not be focused enough to notice those changes. We might have people experiencing mental health concerns that lead to avoidance around emotions. So there's lots of different reasons why people don't actually tap into their emotionality. Now, today I'm going to be focusing in a little bit on adolescence because it's a period of lots of changes, including in emotions. But I think what we're talking about today really applies across the lifespan. So adolescence is a time of lots of development. We have bodily changes. We have changes in emotions, right? They're more intense. They're more labile. We have new behavioral experiences, new settings that kids are going into. There's bigger life decisions and a lot bigger consequences sometimes. And there's more responsibility and autonomy and individuation happening. So this is really an exciting period of storm and stress, and it's a wonderful period. However, the speed of development in all these different domains might be different across each teen and within each domain for each teen. So average is only a statistic, it's not a reality, and you might find that your teen or your child has very different profiles, right? They might be really strong in certain areas and have a relative area of weakness in another. A unique part of adolescence is this increased autonomy coupled with all of these emotional changes for some teens can lead to increased conflict during this developmental period, especially conflict with parents. And the way I think about teens' emotional experiences, really everyone's emotional experiences can be like an iceberg. They're the things we show out on the surface, but there's often a lot more going on under the water. So now we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into emotions. In this section, I want the parents who are watching to first focus on themselves and their own emotional experiences and get good at thinking about these things that we're going to talk about in relationship to your own self. And then we're going to broaden out. And once you get good at that, think about your teen. So here we're going to see an emotional arousal curve. Before we get into this, I want you to take a second and think about all the feelings that you felt today. When we ask people, how did you feel today? They often identify what they're feeling right now. But in reality, we feel a ton of different emotions. So for example, today I felt dread, excitement, fatigue, loved, invigorated, satisfied, and that was all before I ended my morning workout and transitioned to work. We feel a ton of different emotions on any given day. And our reactions to our emotions are very different depending on the certain emotion. So here we see a graph on the x-axis, we're going to see time. On the y-axis, we're going to see our stress level. And so people have different emotional reactions to different emotions. And within a given person, they might react differently. So some people are kind of slow to experience an emotion after a trigger and slow to come down from that emotion. Other people are quick to respond and quick to come down. Some people don't really experience high levels of emotional reactivity and instead kind of simmer and then come down after a while. There are endless numbers of curves that we could draw here. The kids I often work with are quick to respond and quick to slow down. So what I want you to do is, we're not going to actually spend time in the webinar, but maybe take a second to draw your arousal curve in an argument with your child. Get to know yourself better. And maybe draw one in an argument with a friend or a conflict with your spouse. And think about, how do you react differently to different kinds of emotions and different kinds of interactions? Now, the graphs I've previously shown are all averages, right? They're nice and clean and smooth. But we know that stress and arousal does not happen smoothly. Throughout our day, we're going along and we're encountering different triggers and we're engaging in coping. So our emotions are constantly changing. So here we see someone who encountered two triggers, right? Their emotions rose. They did some coping, so they felt a little bit better, and then they encountered another trigger and their emotions shot up again. Now, one of the things I find most helpful with the individuals I work with is this concept of emotional boiling point. And this is a point at our emotional arousal when we go above this point, bad things tends to happen. We say things we don't mean, we do things we didn't intend to do. We lose some of the kind of cognitive control over our behaviors and our words. So we might throw objects. We might threaten physical violence when we're above our boiling point. We might scream. We might name call. We might curse. For some people, when they're above their boiling point, they might freeze and have trouble accessing their thoughts or actions. But in general, when we're above our boiling point, not great things start to happen. I think most of us can resonate with kind of losing control at some point in our lives. Now, for a lot of the families I work with, maybe some people in this audience, it might feel like, in particular for your kids, they go from 0 to 60. And I want to take a second to demystify this idea. So we're pulling back up the same graph, but we're adding some numbers here on the left side. So we're going to go from 0 to 100 in terms of our subjective units of distress level. And we're going to put the emotional boiling point at a 60 in this example. And here we see the same graph, right? We have a person starting off at 0, encountering some triggers, doing some coping, and then shooting up above that emotional boiling point. This graph is not really true because most of us don't start our day at a 0. Our emotions don't disappear overnight. For some people, waking up in the morning in and of itself might be a trigger. They might have been ruminating all night and not slept well. For most of us, we start at some non-zero stress level in our morning. And so if we look at this, we're not going from 0 to 60 if we hit our boiling point. We're going from 20 to 60. We have 20 fewer units to cope if we start our day off at a 20. So here we see, right, this first person with the dashed line has 60 units and the second person has 40 units. So what does this mean? This means we have less time to cope before we hit our emotional boiling point. Now, just to make this more complicated, most people also have a boiling point much lower than 60. So their top end, right, point where they can go to until they hit that point of no control is actually a lot lower. Now, not every emotion is going to hit the emotional boiling point, right? Some emotions rise and they fall with never getting near that emotional boiling point. And they just do this naturalistically without even coping. Or they do this because we engaged in some version of coping. Now, the work we want to do is avoid the emotional boiling point because we know bad things happen when we get there. To do that, we have to think about a detour point. We can't start noticing our emotions or coping with our emotions right at that boiling point level because it's too late. It's like we're a magnet at that point and we're kind of being drawn into the inevitable. We have to start coping, start working through a plan well below, if possible, this detour point. In this example, we're going to put it at 10 units below the boiling point, but the further from our boiling point that we can start working on detouring from this, the better. So we don't want to wait till we're boiling to start coping. Now, what I'm going to present now is a zone-based strategic parenting plan for emotion coping. Again, nothing radically new in this, but we're going to really be kind of thinking, how can you package this so that when you're upset, when your kid's starting to get upset, you know what to do at each level of arousal so you don't have to think about it. So redrawing our nice smooth curve, we have 3 zones now. We have the rise, which is as our emotions go up, but before we hit the boiling point. We have the boil, which is zone 2, anytime we're above the boiling point. And then we have the fall of our emotions. So anytime you're in zone 3 is when you're starting to recover, when you're coming down below the boiling point. So we'll start off with zone 1, which is really about prevent and cope. So the first thing we want to do to help someone manage themselves in zone 1 is to pre-plan individual specific coping skills. We should have lots of behaviors and lots of cognitive coping skills that are positive for that individual. So the behaviors I might engage in when I'm stressed or when I'm angry might be really different than what you might engage in. So we each need our own unique toolbox. We're going to want to start to get better at knowing our triggers. I like to call these sore spots. These are the things that when we activate them, when we encounter them, shoot us up quicker towards that boiling point. Our sore spots are often things that have reoccurred over the course of our lives and have been kind of trained into us to lead to some sort of emotional arousal. Then what we want to do is consider the impact of time, setting, other factors, and really prepare. Around this, I like to think about the analogy of a punch in the gut is never fun, but it's much better when we can be prepared and tense our muscles. So we might think of, are there certain times of day when we are more sensitive? Maybe for those of you who work, it's when you get off of your work day and you have to switch brains and get back into your family brain. Maybe for your kids, it's that kind of right after school hour when they're transitioning to home and have homework to do, but are also exhausted. We're going to want to think of the day of the week. Are there certain days that are worse or better than other days? Are there differences in your weekends versus your weekday? Are there differences in locations? I work with a lot of families that want to start asking questions right on the steps of the school, and just being around other people and talking about your vulnerability points is hard for the kids at that point in time. So that might be a little bit of time of day and a little bit of location that we might want to think about. And then every person interacts with different people in different ways. So we want to think, do you or your child respond differently to different people? So can you say something to your kid and maybe your partner can't because your kid reacts differently to that? So we want to just start to get curious about what happens before arguments or what happens before our emotions start to rise, and see if we can notice any patterns. Around our sore spots, we want to plan ahead. So we want to be aware of our triggers, which can help us manage them and learn to cope ahead. We might want to learn to minimize exposure of our sore spots. So don't go into the situations when we can that trigger that, right? Protect ourselves, put a Band-Aid over the sore spot. We might change behaviors to prevent our activation. We might engage in healthy emotion self-talk rather than negative talk. Often our triggers lead to us spiraling in our thoughts and thinking and seeking out the negative in our world. It's evolutionary. But what we want to do is start to rebalance that view of the world, right? Not see everything as a threat. Or we might want to treat the underlying cause. So if we can identify the cause and get at it, that would be really helpful. Preparing how to respond when we know our sore spot is going to be activated or is probably coming is another thing. Being prepared, right, for that punch in the gut. And then being aware of our issues can also help teens be more sensitive and empathic, and can also allow us to model positive coping to our teens. So doing this for ourselves, which is often hard, right? That cliche, put the mask on yourself before you put the mask on someone else, can be really helpful around managing the things that are hard for us. Uh, we want to also help parents model their own emotions to their teens. We want to model emotion expression and emotion variability. Many children and teens do not think adults experience a range of emotions because we cover it up, we express it in another room, we're not with them at all points in their day. Often the kids I work with say, my parent's a cyborg. They don't feel anything. And in part, that's because parents are working really hard to mask emotions. What we want to do is express our emotions, but within ranges where we can still help ourselves, right, manage them and express them in a positive way. So not above the boiling point. Hiding emotions from teens can impede their ability to learn the action-consequence connection. So if our teen or even our younger child, right, says something mean to us and we don't respond at all, they're learning something, right, about action and consequence. Now, we don't always want to respond. There's lots of strategic management around that. But we might want to later on say to them, I'm not ready to help you. I need some more space, right? There's lots of things that we can do to help teens notice how their feelings or their actions impact us. We also want to model emotion coping. So kids in general learn emotion coping skills from their environment through modeling, and then also through direct instruction. So one of the best things we can do for our younger kids, for our teens, is show them how we cope in positive ways. Do that modeling. So say things like, I'm really stressed. I'm going to take a deep breath, right? And then model it. Going into zone 2, when we're above the boiling point, there is not a lot we can do for other people, but there's a lot that we can do for ourselves. And the thing that we like to teach people is the family timeout. This is a timeout in which each member takes responsibility for tracking their own stress level and calling their own timeout. There is nothing worse than when we are in conflict with someone else saying, you need to take a break, you need to take a timeout. Instead, we want to focus on ourselves. I'm feeling frustrated. I need to take a break and then come back and talk about this later. The timeout is really used to self-soothe, to re-regulate instead of escaping. So we're going to create a list of coping skills for each unique person, and they're going to do them on their own and manage them on their own. Breaks should be as long as the person who is least regulated needs. So typically a minimum of 30 minutes to allow for that naturalistic come down. But some people might need longer. And then after the break, the family comes back together to continue the conversation, to work through if it's not resolved. This is where this timeout is like the timeout in a sports game, right? Our sports teams take a break and then they get back into the game. And multiple breaks might be needed to complete a conversation. So this might become like a dance. Now I'm mixing metaphors. So you might be engaging with your teen, finding you get too dysregulated, or maybe they do, but you call the break for yourself. Then you come back to it and you continue the discussion. People get close to their boiling points, they take another break. So this is a long-term strategy with the goal of avoiding the harmful fight that happens above the boiling point, because nothing happens that's good above the boiling point. And the family needs to agree that if a life-threatening behavior happens or acute danger occurs, they have some sort of plan. And that can involve calling 911, seeking emergency assistance, some other coping plan to make sure safety is happening, because safety is always our number one concern. And then zone 3, this zone where our emotions are coming down, is a time of reflection, adjustment, and maybe even some consequences. But this is the recover phase. In zone 3, we need to be very careful, because re-engaging our teen, our child too soon, or even ourselves can ratchet us right back up into zone 2. So we need to make sure we are actually calm before we re-engage. We'll reevaluate the family timeout plan, the coping skills we're going to use. We might even re-engage in the conversation that led to the escalation. We're going to initiate any pre-planned consequences as parents, and pre-planned is the important point here. We don't want to be negotiating consequences at this point in time. And then we're going to model apologies and repairs. And these can be complicated, but an apology is not always agreeing with someone else's viewpoint. It's owning the components of things that we would want to do differently. And so that is kind of the theme of today. We're going to take some time for questions. I know we had some pre-submitted ones, and if anyone has any questions, we can put them in the chart. I mean the chat. Our first question is how to deal with teens blaming everything on the parent, which I'm guessing is the me in this question. This teen very rarely admits that they're wrong, and it's often the parent's fault that they acted a certain way. I would respond to this in different ways depending on what zone you and your teen are currently in. So if you are above your boiling point and you're getting lots of blame coming your way, that's always a signal for me to say less. Nothing good's going to happen. You're arguing, you're negotiating. In these instances, I recommend you pull back because teens want to keep us in negotiation, often because there's a small, minute chance that you might give in. So we're going to want to take that break. If you're noticing it on the rise, or if you're noticing it before the argument or the blame happens, we're going to want to really kind of look at the situation. Is this something where your teen is blaming you because they want to get something? Is this a situation where your teen is blaming you because they want to get out of something? Those two pathways we're going to have to respond very differently to as parents. So if they're trying to get out of something, we might have to hold to our limit and ignore the blame, walk away, say, I'm not negotiating this anymore. I've given you a no, right? A lot of our teens will push and push and push until we give in. And so a lot of the work we end up doing is helping parents, when they have a limit, hold to that limit. If your teen is trying to get something to you, you might own a little bit more power, right, in that situation. We might want to help you navigate this by being clear on what you can and will and won't do, or can and can't do, or again, limit setting. We had a question about how to deal with this at different age ranges. A younger child, right? This applies to any age. Younger kids might have trouble doing this on their own. So with my younger kids, when I think about coping, I like to draw out diagrams. I like to have them maybe make their own pictures. With them, we make a coping kit. So we get all of our materials together. There might be drawing material, reading material in there, a squishy toy to play with, or a stuffed animal to hug. We might have different smiley faces that they can point to talk about what they're feeling in any given moment. A younger kid might need a cue to engage in the family timeout. We might also not use the word timeout because with younger kids, those are associated with, the more punitive timeouts that we use at that age period. So we might say, I'm using a coping break. We're all going to go our separate ways and come back. We're going to turn this timer on. And when the timer's up, we will all talk about this again. With our older kids who have more autonomy, I like to ask their opinion on how they want to engage in the timeout. This is a family tool, right? So it's not coming from the parents, it's coming from getting the kids involved and also not wanting to fight. Because even in families with chronic conflict, when we ask each individual, they have reasons why the fight maybe is continuing, but they also have a lot of often desire to stop these fights because they're not fun. And living in a conflict-filled environment is stressful. We have another question about coping skills to teach a young teen. This is where I think individual differences really play out. So it's hard to answer this question, but I like to think, what is your teen good at? What do they like? So if they're a sporty person, exercise is a great one. Can you do some push-ups? Can you do some sit-ups? Do you live in an area where you can go for a walk and get outside and maybe breathe some fresh air and just have some distance? If you're an artsy person, do you want to draw? Do you want to write? Do you want to write some things you're grateful down? We know that that's a great coping skill that people use. Can you take some deep breaths? My personal favorite is to go to use the ABCs to distract myself enough and think about something with each letter. So I like to do fruits and vegetables. A is for apple, B is for banana, and so on. You can do it with any topic that you like. We can work at any age range and with any type of person on breathing, on mindfulness, on meditation, but those skills don't work if we don't practice them before the difficult interaction. How to engage when a teen or child is non-compliant and necessary but non-preferred tasks. So schoolwork, getting ready on time? That is a hard question to answer in a webinar, so I'm going to give you the short version of that. I think we have to, first of all, think on how are we going to build that teen's motivation? How can you effectively use rules and consequence to shape up that behavior, but consequences and rules that you can actually apply? And how can we work on and look at where your what we call relational trust is? So how do we help you and your teen stop constantly having conflict and maybe start working together? And that might mean we use some paradoxical strategies, which we actually stop focusing on getting your teen to do those things and think about it, their schoolwork is their problem in some ways, right? How do we help them, even though this hurts, right, as a parent to watch your kid struggle, but we might want to strategically let them struggle, help school get involved, help manage that behavior, because it's not you as a parent's homework to get done, in order to increase the teen's motivation. Because often what I see is when teens aren't doing the things that they should be doing, parents are working harder than the teen is to get them to do that thing. So we might actually need you to strategically back off and then re-engage. And then we have another question: how to deal with teens who constantly lie about everything and only are truthful when you have receipts. Lying is a really tough one, right? Relational trust starts to degrade when we have lying. Lying is also tricky because once you get labeled as someone who's non-truthful or a liar, you tend to have fewer and fewer opportunities to be trusted. And then what I hear from the teens is they're like, I get in trouble anyway, I can't do anything, so I might as well lie. The other thing I often hear from teens is that if they're going to get in trouble anyway, if no one believes them, they might as well try lying because there's a small negligible chance parents will believe them. So the first thing I always recommend around lying is stop tricking your kids into lying for you. So let's say you have a teen who comes home smelling like alcohol. Rather than asking them the question of, did you drink alcohol? Which they're probably going to say no, because there's a small chance you'll be like, okay, and then they won't get in trouble, is you might make a statement, right? You smell like alcohol. And you might have a predetermined consequence. If you come home smelling like alcohol, then this will happen. And then if it does happen, you can execute on that consequence. So we are going to try to minimize the number of times where you box your kid into lying just by changing your language. It doesn't mean that we change the rules and consequences or your expectations. The other thing we're going to slowly do is, as we work with your teen on their side of the equation, is work with you on where you can slowly allow your teen to be trusted. So what are the areas where they actually might follow through? And can you have them do more of that so you start to build some of this positive momentum, put some more coins in what I call your relationship bank account? And that way we're going to work towards more positive interactions. Because I find when we deal with lying, when we deal with fighting, what I hear from kids and parents is all of our interactions are negative. And that's never a good thing. We want kids and parents, right, to find these times to come together so they're not constantly butting heads, but instead are sometimes working together. So we have a couple of inroads around that one. So it looks like this is all the time we have for questions today. On behalf of the Department of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, thank you so much for joining this webinar today. You can find a full list of our upcoming webinars as well as recordings of previous webinars at nyulangone.org/CSC webinars. Again, that's nyulangone.org/CSC webinars. Thank you again for your time, and I hope you guys have a good week.